What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. And this one is some of my early thoughts ahead of Game Week 12. So I'm going to go through some of the watch list players plus the key talking points from Game Week 11, of which there were quite a few. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button to help me hit 400k subscribers. Otherwise, let's jump into it. Alright, we've got to start with Erling Haaland. I would say that anyone that owned him for Game Week 11 is probably a little bit frustrated that Man City have gone and scored 6 goals against Bournemouth, a fixture we knew was great, and he's walked away with 0 attack and returns and finished on a 1-pointer because he came off at half-time. It's probably even worse if you panicked after the Man United game and started bringing him in for -8s, -12s and stuff like that, because you definitely haven't broken even. Either way, it was made a little bit easier last night because obviously Salah blanked against Luton. And in general, not many people have done that well this game week. Unless you had like Mitchell or Doku or Man United defence or Bruno Fernandes, obviously Trippier did well too, then you probably don't have a high score. Anyone with 30 plus points is probably on a green arrow. It's just one of those weeks. You've got to take it on the chin and just move on to the next game week. Obviously, the reason that Haaland came off at half-time was because of injury. Now, we will hear from Pep Guardiola once again before the Champions League game, and he's definitely going to get asked about Haaland, and then once again on Friday ahead of the weekend's matches. So we are going to get a couple of updates. Hopefully, he'll be fine. If he is, then I think you keep hold of him, because although they've got Chelsea away, Liverpool at home and Spurs at home next 3 games, by the time you get to Game Week 15, Villa away, Game Week 16, Luton away, 17 is Palace at home, you are going to want him back, I think. So there's no use using a transfer unless he's out for a little while. This is what Pep Guardiola said about him. It was a twist in the ankle. He said, we didn't want to take risks with him. He didn't feel comfortable. And bear in mind, when he was subbed, City were comfortably winning that game. They were never going to lose it anyway. He'll be back maybe Tuesday, so possibly for the Champions League game. For what it's worth, I think for City it's quite an easy game. They're already on 9 points from the first 3 matches. They can definitely win that game without him, so I suspect he's going to be rested no matter what. And then he said, but maybe next Sunday. So it's only a maybe for the Chelsea game. The thing to remember, between game weeks 12 and 13, there's an international break. So if he did miss Chelsea, he would then have another 2 weeks to recover, unless he gets fit enough to play, obviously, in the international games. But let's say that's not the case. He would miss Chelsea, but still have another 2 weeks off afterwards to get ready for Liverpool. So if he's only going to miss 1 game, I would probably keep hold of him, because you're going to want him back sooner rather than later. If it's 2 or more fixtures, then I would be tempted to kind of move him on to someone else for the short term and then get him back. Maybe not even to spread the funds around, just to get a striker in that you know is going to play the next few games, try and get those additional points, then bring Haaland back. But that would really rely on Pep telling us that he's going to be out for like a month. If that doesn't happen, I think you just keep hold of him, especially if you've got a good bench. The other problem is, even if you wanted to get rid of Haaland, which striker do you bring in? Now, if Haaland's out, Alvarez suddenly becomes a great option, because he'd play number 9, which would be better for him from an FPL point of view. He'd also probably be on penalties as well. And look, Man City can win these games and score goals, but Chelsea away and Liverpool at home on paper is not the best fixtures to target, I would say. I wouldn't mind Alvarez. If you've got him, happy days, right? You're not worried whatsoever. But I don't know if I want to bring him in, necessarily. The other strikers that people will look at, I think a lot of people already own Watkins if they're going to have him. Darwin Nunez, okay, Brentford at home is good this week. We know how many chances he gets. I know he didn't score against Luton, but he had plenty of shots, and I'm sure that will continue against Brentford. But then it's Man City away in Game Week 13, which isn't that great. Nketiah could be an option, and you could look to maybe bring him in, then shuffle funds around and make sure you've still got enough money to get Haaland back later. Burnley at home, Brentford away. That relies on Jesus still being out, which I think will happen, but there's no guarantees on that. And then the other player people are going to look at is Callum Wilson, which I fully get. I think Bournemouth away is a great fixture. Then it's Chelsea at home. But also, what if Isak is back at that point? Obviously, you've got Champions League and stuff as well. You're just not quite sure what his minutes are going to be like. So it's not that I think any of those players I've just spoken about are bad options. It's just almost like there's not a perfect replacement. Like if it was Bournemouth away, no Champions League, and then straight into, I don't know, Sheffield United at home, Fulham at home or something like that. Callum Wilson, great. And of course they can do well against Chelsea. They've just beaten Arsenal. I get that. But it's just not quite as nice as I would like for any of those players. And I'm not sure there's a huge amount of other options I would look to bring in anyway. So I think given the fact that you are probably going to want Haaland back, I know the last few weeks have been frustrating. Those people that went without him, I think even they would admit this has gone way better than they would have expected. But I still think that most of those people are going to be looking to get him in sooner rather than later. Maybe some of them are going to risk keeping him until, I don't want to say risk because I think it's gone quite well, but not getting back until after blank game week 18. That could happen. That could work out well. But I just look at fixtures like Luton away and think I've got to captain him in game weeks like that. So yeah, if he's not out at all, keep. If he's only out for Chelsea, I'm going to keep. If it's 2 matches or more, maybe I'll sell him. But even then, I'm not completely convinced. So although there weren't many actual FPL points this weekend, there were a lot of talking points from Game Week 11, bearing in mind that we've still got Spurs versus Chelsea to come on Monday night. So if anything big happens in those games, I'll cover it in the rest of the videos this week. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But another popular player that went off injured before the 60th minute, like Haaland, was Matty Cash. 35.4% overall ownership. It looked like a shoulder injury. The problem is, from what I can see anyway, there weren't really any quotes from Unai Emery after the game about this injury. So we don't know whether it's just a minor thing, it was just a precaution, he's going to be out for a couple of games, he's going to be out for a while. We just don't know. The good news is we should hear from Unai Emery twice before the Game Week 12 deadline because they've got a European match on Thursday. The bad news is you're probably going to have to wait till Thursday before you get any updates. So anyone wanting to move early is probably going to have to do it with little to no information. Now, because we're waiting for news on Cash, news on Haaland, and there's European matches. If you can, you should be waiting on transfers anyway. But if you want to get rid of him this week, even if he was available or becomes available later on when we find out more, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world. If you look at Villa's upcoming fixtures, they got Fulham at home this week, perfectly fine to play him in if he's fit. Spurs away in 13, I would say no clean sheet. Bournemouth away in 14, a goodish chance of a clean sheet, I would say. Then they got City at home, Arsenal at home, Brentford away. I don't see too many clean sheets in those 3 fixtures. Now, the good thing is, the high chance of clean sheets is sooner rather than later. But if you're in a position where, you've got 2 free transfers, the rest of your squad is looking pretty good. Let's say Haaland is absolutely fine. Then moving Cash on this week as a longer term move would be okay. Like, I was looking at, my team straight after the Game Week 11 deadline, before any matches were played, thinking I wouldn't really have to make a huge amount of moves this week. And although Cash versus Fulham is good, if I could use up one of my 2 free transfers, then roll the other one as a long-term move, that wouldn't be the end of the world. Now, the problem is, I don't know if there's a huge amount of standout, on paper, great options to go for from Cash. There's good options, but none where you feel like they're absolutely essential to bring in. If you've got lots of money, then obviously Trippier is great. The player that I would have really liked to have brought in this week is Estepinian, but even if De Zerbi says he's available, I think given that he's been out for a little while, I wouldn't necessarily expect him to start. He might just get minutes off the bench and stuff like that. So I don't think I can go there. I think in general, the Brighton defence, in fact, it hasn't been great whatsoever. Right? 0 clean sheets after 11 games is not good. But they do have some fixtures coming up where maybe they could get one. Sheffield United at home this week, Burnley at home in 16. But between that, Forest away, Chelsea away, Brentford at home, I'm not sure there's too many clean sheets there. And I just don't know if Dunk offers enough over Estepinian to just go for him. I feel like I will just wait until the right moment to get Estepinian into my team instead. I think Arsenal defence looks good. Saliba at 5.2 million. They got Burnley at home this week, Brentford away in 13, Wolves at home in 14, Luton away in 15. I think 2 or 3 of those games look pretty good for a clean sheet. Plus the Arsenal defence is just generally top 5 in the league. So I think that's a good option. After that, it does get a bit trickier. Villa away 16, Brighton at home 17, Liverpool away 18. But I feel like an Arsenal defender is one of those that if you had to play them in any of those games, just to keep them for the long term, it really wouldn't be the end of the world. So the number one transfer for most people from Cash, unless you got the money for Trippier, is probably to go to Saliba. Just keep in mind that that might block you from going for Nketiah though. Like in my team, I've already got Saka and Gabriel. So if I get Saliba, I can't also get Nketiah as a short-term move. So that's why, although I don't think selling Matty Cash is the end of the world, I don't know if there's a obvious this is the best option because there's lots of other factors to consider. Another player you could look at is like a Crystal Palace defender. But I guess at this point, we've got to wait for more updates. But if he misses Fulham, I'm almost certainly going to sell him because for the next 5 game weeks after that, Bournemouth away is the only good fixture for a clean sheet. And in that one, it's an away game anyway. I know some people are going to point out that in game week 18, which is a blank game week for Man City and Brentford, Villa have Sheffield United at home. And that's great, right? I'd love Matty Cash for that week. But that's a lot of game weeks before that where you're not getting a huge amount of points. If you've got a great defence where you can bench him, happy days, right? If your squad rotation of those defenders is good. But I think for a lot of people, it's going to be worth just selling him. So I'd say Saliba's probably the #1 target. I'd love Estupiñán, but I don't know if he's going to be available. Dunk, if you really want to target that Brighton defence. Crystal Palace defender looks good as well. Otherwise, Trippier if you've got the money. All right, let's talk about Lascelles. Maybe one of the best value players in FPL right now. A £4 million defender for Newcastle. Top 3 defence in the league. That is all pretty good. And I'll come on to the FPL stuff in a minute. But I just want to say, how well is he playing? And I don't want to sound patronising. He's a Premier League player. Of course, he's good. But I think when Botman got injured, there was some concern, not necessarily from Newcastle fans, that defence would be weaker because Botman was a mainstay in that back four last year. Lascelles also just hadn't had regular minutes for a long time, but he slotted in and Newcastle looked just as good. So from that perspective, the defence still looks proper decent, right, as we've come to expect with them. From an FPL point of view, it's all reliant on Botman being out, right? Once he is fit and available, as good as Lascelles has been, he's probably going to be straight out of the first 11. From what Eddie Howe said last week, they still hadn't diagnosed the Botman injury. That kind of tells me he's probably going to be out for a while. I don't know that for sure. There is definitely some risk with buying Lascelles, but for $4 million, that risk is minimal. The other setup that I saw people talking about is what if, even with Botman out, Dan Burn plays left centre-back and maybe Lewis Hall comes in at left-back. Now, I spoke about that, I think, last week or the week before. That is, of course, a possibility, but I didn't really think it was that likely. But it's even less likely now that Dan Burn has gone and got injured. So I think with Botman out, given how well Lascelles is playing and how well that defence is doing, I think he just keeps his place. So if you need an enabler for a bigger move, like even Matty Cash down to Lascelles wouldn't be the worst option this week if Cash is out. I think he looks really good. Now, as I said last week, my opinion doesn't change that much. So my thoughts on the Newcastle defence in general, with the fixtures they've got, is still the same. I think they're a solid defence, so they will get clean sheets, no matter what the fixtures are like. But we shouldn't expect as much as we shouldn't expect as many clean sheets as they've had recently, because the fixtures are going to get tougher. But as we saw against Arsenal, they are very strong at home. So next 6, you got Bournemouth away, then it's Chelsea at home, Man United at home, Everton away, Spurs away, and Fulham at home. Now, bear in mind, it's a bit different to Trippier in that he's only $4 million. So in the harder fixtures, if you've got a different defender to play, you'd probably just bench him anyway. With Trippier, you always want to play him. So there's that to factor in as well. Now, I think Bournemouth away is a pretty good fixture in 12. Fulham at home in 17 is good. The 4 in between, I'm less sure about. I think everyone can agree that Spurs away is going to be tough to get a clean sheet. Maybe even Everton away, the way they're playing at the moment. But I don't think if you had to play Lascelles against Everton, you'd be worried, right? So that's an okay fixture too. With Chelsea and Man United, I fully get it. Right now, out of those 3 teams, Chelsea, Man United and Newcastle are the best, right? Better attacks, better defence. I get that. But I still think in those kind of games, you can concede, even if you've just kept a clean sheet against Arsenal. And I think 2 of Chelsea's best games so far this season have been against tougher opposition. They were pretty good against Arsenal up until the Sanchez mistake. They were pretty decent against Liverpool as well. So I do expect them to give Newcastle a game. But because Newcastle are so strong at home, could I see 1 clean sheet from Chelsea and Man United? Absolutely. So that's why I think he's such incredible value. Just on those 2 teams quickly, right? Chelsea I was looking at, they are... Where are they now here? I'm just looking for their expected goals. Yeah, expected goals conceded. Chelsea are top 4 best defence. So that's pretty good, right? But we're not really worried about attacking returns with Lascelles. If we look at their attacking threat so far, before the Spurs game, Chelsea are at 1.59 expected goals per 90. That's not far off Villa at 1.65 and not far off Brighton at 1.68. So their attack isn't as bad as maybe they look sometimes. So I don't think Chelsea at home, Man United at home are easy for clean sheets. But of course, Lascelles is $4 million. So if you wanted to, you could bench him for those games. And if you had to play him or he came off the bench, you wouldn't be that worried. So I really think going forward, if I was buying a Newcastle defender that wasn't Trippier and I didn't want to play them every week or anything like that, I think it has to be Lascelles. Like I said earlier, there is some risk. Maybe Botman comes back earlier. Maybe he's suddenly fine. But I think he's already been out longer than we were first told. He's definitely out until after the international break. And we don't even know if they've diagnosed the injury yet. And when they do, how long that might be. So yeah, I think if you need an enabler out of the £4 million defenders right now, Lascelles is probably the top option. So I'm just going to run through some of the other talking points from the weekend, and I'm sure we'll cover some of these in a bit more detail in other videos this week. Tsimikas was benched against Luton. Not ideal, especially if you just brought him in. I did see some people speculating that because of Luton's set-piece threat, that's why they wanted Gomez in to kind of combat that. Could that now happen for Brentford and Man City? Possibly, right? We knew that Tsimikas was at least a bit of a risk and he might miss the odd game. I think if you don't own him, because it's Brentford at home, Man City away next 2 games, you probably just leave it for now and maybe come back to it later. If you own him, I probably wouldn't panic too much. Let's see what happens in the Europa League. If he gets another 90 minutes there might be some concern for the weekend. But I think as it stands, I'd probably be okay playing him. Flekken off at half-time. For the second time this season, we almost thought we'd have a 3.9 million playing player in Fekonja, but apparently it's just a dead leg, so there's every chance that Flekken will be back for game week 12, so don't panic on that one just yet. Maguire, clean sheet. I've talked about Lascelles at 4 million. Maguire's only 4.2, and Man United have some okay fixtures coming up for clean sheets. For what it's worth, I would probably go Lascelles instead. Newcastle defence is definitely superior, but while Maguire is playing, and a bit of a threat from set pieces as well, I don't mind that as an option. But I think he's one of those that you either put on your wild card in game week 10 or you're just going to ignore him. But Man United defence might be okay-ish over the next couple of weeks. Not long-term or anything like that. Matt Turner was benched. He has now lost his place for that Forest team. I don't think this is an issue whatsoever. I don't think anyone out there is playing Matt Turner as their main goalkeeper anyway. Someone said on stream last night, like he's a must-sell. For me, he's just someone you don't even worry about until your next wild card. Unless at some point over the next 10 weeks, you're got 2 free transfers and nothing else to do, then you just leave Matt Turner to be on the bench and that's it. You just play your other goalkeeper every single game week. For me, that's Areola. That's probably the case for a lot of people. Could Fabianski come back in at some point? Maybe, but I highly doubt it. So I think given the fixtures West Ham have got, you just play Areola and you don't even worry about it. If you've got a spare transfer at some point, maybe you deal with the goalkeeper situation. But Turner, it just really does not matter that much at all. Saka, 0.02 expected goals. Total, not even per 90, just total over the last 3 matches. That is concerning. They have played Chelsea away and Newcastle away as part of those games. But I still worry a little bit. I don't think there's anything to panic about, though, because over the next 4 game weeks, they get to play both Burnley and Luton, and I suspect we might see his numbers improve somewhat. But at this point, I don't think, like people saying he's not essential, I don't think anyone's essential. I've said that so many times over the last few weeks, but he is maybe looking less important than we thought he might be once we saw Sheffield United at home in 10, Burnley at home in 12. But I think for now, if you've got him, you definitely hold on to him, right? I don't think you can sell him before Burnley at home. And if your plan was to bring him in, I still don't think it's a bad transfer, but we should keep an eye on that. Like in terms of Arsenal attack overall, their expected goals per 90 as a team, they're only just ahead of Man United. And Man United have been really poor. So I think there are some concerns there, but obviously the fixtures coming up are good, and we just saw them batter Sheffield United 5-0. So I think they can do similar, not maybe quite that many goals, but similar against Burnley and Luton. Doku, great. Fair play if you had him in game week 11. Absolutely enjoy that differential. For anyone thinking about bringing him in, I just think the next 3 fixtures aren't quite as good. He's also not guaranteed minutes. I would just ignore him. Kudus, back-to-back starts for West Ham. Goal and assist against Brentford. Another 6.5 million midfielder or someone in and around that price anyway to consider. But there's so many options. I don't think he has suddenly gone to number 1. I still think that's probably in Burmo long term. And then Crystal Palace, for anyone thinking about bringing in a new defender, I've spoken about, Dunk and Saliba and Trippier and Lascelles and even Harry Maguire. But Palace are on 5 clean sheets in the first 11 games. That's joint top with Newcastle and Arsenal. If Spurs keep one against Chelsea, they'll also have 5. The good thing about Palace is they're not that exciting in terms of attacking threat. I know Anderson's got a few returns, but I wouldn't expect a huge amount. Even Mitchell's goal at the weekend, right? That's not going to happen that often. But they're going to start. There's no worries about rotation. They don't have Europe to worry about or anything like that. And the next 4 fixtures are pretty good. So I would consider Crystal Palace defenders as a shorter term move. They're a decent defence last year. They're looking like a decent defence again, and the fixtures are pretty good. I'll leave that there because there's loads of stuff we're going to talk about anyway in the next few videos. We've got transfer tips tomorrow, team selection on Wednesday, game week preview on Thursday, final thoughts on Friday, and deadline stream on Saturday. Do you know what? I do those same videos every single week and I still can't remember the order and what their names are and stuff like that. But anyway, they're coming. If you've enjoyed that one, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. If you listen on podcast, please do rate 5 stars if you're enjoying the content. Otherwise, I will catch you tomorrow.